So I'm pretty sure I'm not alone when I'm kind of looking at the kinds of discussions that are out there, particularly on social media. Um, I don't think I'm alone in having a kind of reaction to, um, I guess, the confrontation with the reality that many people, vast numbers of people, are living with very sometimes cruel, sometimes distorted, sometimes outright crazy worldview. So let's just call it vast numbers of people living with a deluded worldview. And I, like everyone else, I read something and I have a reaction to it. And I just want to point out that um, there's a problem with this. And first of all, it's not a very useful way of engaging or of receiving these kinds of impressions because in a way it just causes distress inside, and one begins to feel maybe hopeless about the potential future of the world, etc., etc. But the key thing that it does is that it removes um, the sense of responsibility that I have toward uh, my own understanding. And in particular, this kind of gets back to some of our earlier discussions. Why is it so frigging important to understand the fundamentals of perception? And by studying the fundamentals of perception, we can absolutely come to the conclusion that we ourselves necessarily have a subjective, and you can call it deluded, or we can call it a deluded worldview. And it's really a question, this is so offensive, but this to me is the fundamental of a proper education. How do I know what truth is if I don't understand what delusion is? How do I know what truth seeking is if there's no kind of background worldview that includes the concept of subjectivity? And so this is kind of why it's so fundamental. So everybody wishes to have answers to the big questions like, what should I do, and how can the world be saved, etc., etc. And in a way, the problem that cannot be escaped is that no matter what, there is no hope for the world so long as we continue to live in a state of delusion. Okay, well, that sounds like some kind of, pie in the sky. Maybe someone will say, oh, that sounds very Buddhist or this or that. So I want to point out again and again that, it's a fundamental principle of what I'm trying to expose. This is not like, Paul Kasdan's idea. I think I'm just exposing something that I think ought to be, self-evident. There's a principle of self-discoverability. In other words, a human being that looks at their life and goes back to these fundamental questions concerning moments of truth, moments of meaning. What is truth and what is meaning? Will inevitably come to a conclusion that there is a whole side of ourselves which is interpretive, which interprets the environment, and which necessarily comes up with a bunch of answers to things, like I've pointed out before. Oh, that's a door, this is a this is a that. Those are really, really basic examples. But beyond that, we go further and further and further into our analysis, or the construction of a worldview in which things make sense. Political events make sense, this makes sense, that makes sense. And everyone has this kind of piece of the puzzle, etc., etc. And so I'm saying, okay, well, that's inevitable. No one can have the full the full picture on a subjective level. But what we have in common is our ability to be objective. And the most fundamental aspect of being objective is the knowledge, the direct experiential knowledge of the fact of our own ignorance. And, that is what I'm going to call truth seeking, and it is also an answer to the question, like, oh, well, what should I do? I'm in distress, I'm in whatever. So the point of, or the, I suppose, the approach of what I'm suggesting, which I think is a far more realistic approach than I've seen in many places, which is simply to actually, if we wish to have that sensation of meaning, which we do, and we wish to, just not live in an absolute state of distress and a state of fear, it's all these things, is that we need to, in our every day moment, whenever possible, is to bring about that other type of perception, which is immediate. And that really leads to a concept of just, being, actually living my life. So why is this different, or why is this, an important idea? And what does this whole bowstring thing have to do with anything? The analogy of the bowstring is useful because it describes the concept that tension is an inevitability in the human life. So to observe is to bring about another type of awareness, and we should not expect this to evaporate tension or resolve all the world's problems. This is not the point. The point is to actually be able to live and to be able to see that kind of distress. But something definitely definitely occurs when that other force is there. We begin to have a sense of meaning, a sense of knowledge of our own subjectivity, and a sense of appreciation for the fact that subjectivity is inevitable. And then from there we begin to look at really serious questions like, well, how does one resolve subjectivity within the context of one's own life, and what kinds of things can be organized in society to help move us in a direction of truth-seeking. So, as obscure as it may seem, there ain't no hope for the world outside of truth. If somebody has a delusion that, oh, well, what we really need is for everyone to think just like me, to have my same delusion, and you see how far that goes. First it's a nation that's deluded, and then within a nation there's these people and those people and those people, and that whole process of differentiation between one group and another, and othering, and on and on and on it goes, until one is essentially left realizing that I'm alone in being the only person in the world that actually is right. And for me, of course, that's true, because I need to be right, because I need to orient myself in this in this world, and so I have to have a way of orienting. So the difference between a person who is, stuck in a state of delusion, and someone who's actually seeking, in order to seek, in order to receive this kind of information, we need to have this sense of this other direction, which is the direction of complete. When I say, it sounds like just, oh, it's awareness, or it's much, it's much more than that. It's actually a state of questioning, and that's how we arrive at at truth. It's not by knowing. It's we're not stuck in the view that I know exactly what is. No, we actually have to live in a state of questioning, and that state is not to be expected to be comfortable. So that's the kind of that's the kind of, I guess, idea I'm trying to get across, is that let's not have that expectation. Let's move in that direction of questioning our own worldview, of understanding that other people necessarily have a very subjective worldview, and that if we are to make any progress, it will be by discovering truth. It will never resolve these right, left, liberal, this, that, communist, free world, whatever. We'll never resolve those kinds of issues if we are in a fixed position, if we attack the other side. What we need to do is realize that the other side sees it according to the way that the best information that they've been conditioned to have, and so on. And so I guess that's the beginning of a plea for a kind of what you call a daily practice. It's not about, meditation does not change worldview. Tai Chi, yoga, all these things. You can still be an ignorant person and do all those things. And not to say that there are bad things to do. There are very good things to do. And, but, fundamentally, we need to observe our own subjectivity.